Are you still feeling that evil, or do we conquer that
It's
between that
there.
time
It's
you wrote
there.
it?
Evil is, working every day, Jack. And
It
what we
is
have to do
working.
is recognize it begins with a realization that there is a truth. It's an
Mm,
objective truth. It's
mm.
outside of us. God has given us a conscience to know the truth, to evaluate the truth that exists outside of us and apply that truth in the everyday circumstances of life.
Anybody here create the universe? Nobody? I said, did anybody here write the story, the big story we came into, gave meaning and purpose to all the things that you see? Nobody. That means you guys came into a story, didn't you? And I said exactly what you're saying, just in a little different way. And God gave us reason, intellect, free will, a conscience to figure out what is the truth, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
there.
can you imagine the pride of us, Deacon Frank? We're one little dot in the universe, and we think, I got the answer to this.
Exactly.
No
That's
wonder I'm
it's
depressed and anxious.
exactly.
Welcome to the Become Who You Are podcast, a production of the John Paul II Renewal Center. I'm Jack Riggert, your host. Today, we're experiencing something that's quasi-unexpected here in the United States and across the Atlantic. A Catholic renaissance has taken place, mainly among young people. In France, over 10,000 adults were baptized this Easter, with young people leading the charge. I was just off the phone with someone that wanted me to come down and speak in Tucson, Arizona. I'm outside of Chicago, as everybody knows. The woman on the phone said Tucson is a very secular, but she said her mass, the mass at her parish, is beginning to fill up with young people. So what's going on here? Is this a passing fad or something that's really bigger than that? And we're sensing that it's bigger than that, especially here in the United States. We have an apostolate within our apostolate called Claymore, Militus Christi, to disciple these young men. When they come back into the church, and when they're looking at the church, we ask them, what's going on? What moved you? And they said, we're seeking the truth. We're tired of moral relativism. We're tired of the evil we see around us and in our own hearts with pornography addictions and all kinds of things. And the second thing, once they actually come into the church, they start asking specific questions. One of those questions is the truth concerning Mary's perpetual virginity. Didn't Jesus have brothers and sisters? Didn't Mary have other children? So those are the two things we're seeing so much, this presence of evil in the world, and also some specific questions. Well, we're lucky to have Deacon Frank here. Deacon Frank is a permanent deacon in the United States. He's involved in the Eucharistic revival. He's been a deacon for 17 years. And we're gonna bring him on to help wade through and help these young people that are coming back into the church. Deacon Frank, it's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Jack, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
These young people, Deacon Frank, are looking for models, role models. Not only role models that will show them what having the faith looks like, which is important to them, but also role models that can help them, disciple them, mentor them as they come into the faith. They answer questions, and so that's what we do on a lot of these podcasts. So, we get wonderful people like yourself, Deacon, to come in and help us through these things. You wrote an article, so I want to talk about two of your articles, and I didn't warn you ahead of time, so God bless you if you can remember this.
No problem.
But this was right before the election, and you wrote about evil, and you said, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. You talked about all kinds of things we talk about on this show, which are so important, and what these young people see. Abortion, these LGBTQ issues, the human trafficking, the fentanyl epidemic. You put it all in here. The crime we see on our streets, the inflation that's mislabeled, as you put it, as economic growth, indoctrination, which we've seen is sexual indoctrination especially, but the CRT, the critical gender theories that they're pushing on our kids all the way into kindergarten. You can't make this stuff up. And then in the other article was the truth concerning Mary's perpetual virginity, both in the Catholic Exchange. Wonderful articles, Deacon Frank. So thank you for writing those, first of all.
Thank you, Jack.
Are you still feeling that evil, or do we conquer that
It's
between that
there.
time
It's
you wrote?
there. Evil is, working every day, Jack. And what
It
we
is
have to do
working.
is recognize it begins with a realization that there is a truth. It's an objective truth. It's outside of us. God has given us a conscience to know the truth, to evaluate the truth that exists outside of us and apply that truth in the everyday circumstances of life. Okay, that's
Yes.
what our conscience is. What the culture has done over the last couple hundred years is to deny objective truth and replace it with subjective truth, which, I'm sure we've all heard the expression, my truth and your truth. There is no my truth and your truth. There's only the truth, right?
Yeah.
And that truth is Jesus Christ. Okay. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is recognize first where to deal with the problem, you have to identify what the problem is before you can deal with its many symptoms. And the problem is we have denied objective truth in our
Yes.
culture.
Another way, to say that is, and you're right on, of course, is that when we're speaking to young people, 90%, the study was done, I think about 5 or 6 years ago. At that time, high school and college students, 90% of them would subscribe to moral relativism, right? There is no truth.
Right.
I think those numbers are a little lower just because they've seen the moral chaos, as you even wrote in your article. When there is a subjective truth, right? I like blue and you like green, and I like fish and you like steak. So there are things like that. But there's subjective truth, so we say. But objective truth is
Right.
something that we live out. We feel this in our heart, and our hearts are made, aren't they, Deacon Frank, for the truth?
Absolutely.
I remember as a
Absolutely.
young guy thinking, what is the truth of this thing? I grew up in the sexual revolution. I remember clearly in my heart thinking, I need to know the truth.
Exactly. And, in addition to the article you quoted about
Woe to those who call
woe to
evil good
those,
and good evil,
right.
yes.
There's two others that I wrote earlier than that I think
Mm,
really get to this issue. The first one is, What is Truth? A Modern Day Tower of Babel Story. And the second one is, When History Became Legend and Legend Became Myth. And
mm.
both of them deal with this same issue, okay, but only go in more detail. The focus on the article that you're referencing really dealt with the election and how
Yes.
we had a very clear choice to make. And I tried to make that case as clear as possible without being political. But the groundwork for that was done in these other two articles. In the first one, which was What is Truth? A Modern Day Tower of Babel Story, I posit that, when God basically confused people at Babel, right, and they couldn't communicate with one another, that a lot of work that Satan would have done to get them to rebel against God went for naught. And
Mm.
Satan would have begrudgingly looked at it and said, gee, that's something I can learn from, meaning confusing language. And that's
Yeah.
what they've done by virtue of introducing subjective truth. Because what if we don't have the same understanding of what words mean, then we're not speaking the same language.
No, you're exactly right. This abuse of language is a big deal right now. That's why this use of these gender terms,
Right,
gender ideology, the
right,
pronouns. And,
right.
people
Yeah,
think, well, what's wrong with just, they, them? And you say,
right,
well, because you're speaking of one person.
right,
And when you get into those kind of things, when you say a boy can become a girl just because I think it in my head,
right,
if I can swallow that lie, that abusive language, I'll swallow any lie, won't I?
right. And it can go even further than that, Jack, in that we could use the same words, the exact same words, but have two different meanings to those
Mm.
same words because of subjective truth.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what we have to do is recognize that what this denial of objective truth has done is create the belief in a subjective truth, which results in chaos. God gave us objective truth for order, for there to be order in the world. When we look at the world, we look at nature, everything is ordered. There is structure and order to the world. Yet when we can't even use the same words and mean the same things, what you're really going for is chaos. And that's really what we suffer in the world today. We suffer a total breakdown of order because we're not seeking the truth. We're seeking
You
our
you
own
mentioned
desires.
What I've realized, and you hit on it just a few minutes ago, when I'm speaking about the truth, and somebody asks me what is the truth, the truth is not a something. The truth is a somebody, and
Exactly.
his name is Jesus Christ. If you remember those bands, I don't know if you remember them, Deacon Frank. It was many years ago. Those bands. What would Jesus do? And
Exactly.
I'll tell you what, that's not a bad thing. We ought to bring those bands back, I think.
John, I worked for many years. I was an executive director of a law firm, and on my desk was a rock, shape of a rock, and on it was those exact same words. What would
Oh,
Jesus do? And I would
mm.
look at that rock occasionally and make sure that I was doing things consistent with what God's truth is.
Yes. People ask, how do I know Jesus exists? And, all kinds of questions when they're coming back into the church, right? And there's all kinds of ways to talk about that. But truth, sometimes I say, you got to walk into the story and keep looking at Jesus and asking, what is the truth of my life? What is the truth? How should I act in this situation? And you'll start to find your way through. The closer you get to Christ, it's amazing. I stopped trying to go down different paths and trying to massage this to people. Now I just say it. If you're
Yeah.
seeking the truth,
I-
let me
I-
give you an example. Go follow that guy on the cross, and you know what? It works. It really works. It's amazing.
Remember in reading John's gospel, there's an interaction between Pontius Pilate and Jesus.
Yes.
And Jesus says, whoever seeks the truth will hear my voice. Pontius Pilate said, what is truth? And
What
that's
is
what
truth?
Pontius Pilate represents our culture today. What
Mm-hmm.
is truth? And what we have to do is recognize it. We don't determine the truth. What we're to do is to use our conscience to apply the universal truth, the objective truth, to the everyday circumstances of life. And what is the truth? It's what Jesus taught us. Okay, in the Gospels and so forth, he taught us everything we need to know in order to live the life of true discipleship.
When you're saying that, I was speaking to some young people not just recently, and I asked them. I said, I don't really know you. I said, anybody here, just to get to know you a little bit, anybody here create the universe? Nobody. I said, anybody here write the story, the big story we came into, gave meaning and purpose to all the things that you see? Nobody. That means you guys came into a story, didn't you? And I said exactly what you're saying, just in a little different way. And God gave us reason, intellect, free will, a conscience to figure out what is the truth, right?
Yeah,
I mean, can you imagine the pride of us, Deacon Frank? We're one little dot in the universe, and we think, I got the answer to this.
exactly.
No wonder I'm
It's
depressed and anxious.
exactly. You know, there were two other articles, Jack, that relate to this. It's really both of them deal with science because
Mm.
God gave us not only our faith, but he also gave us our reasoning abilities. And John Paul II said, we can know the truth through faith and reason, right? And there's a couple of things that really stood out. I wrote an article back in, I think it was December of last year, about 8 probabilities. What's the probability that a person would randomly fulfill 8 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled? Now, Jesus didn't
Yeah,
fulfill
let's
eight.
talk about that.
Yeah,
Let's talk about that.
Jesus didn't fulfill eight. He fulfilled over 300
Mm.
prophecies. Okay. And a scientist, a math professor, along with 600 of his students, did a class exercise. And they calculate. The professor's name was Dr. Peter Stoner. The class exercise took place in the early 1950s, and the professor selected 8 of the prophecies that Jesus fulfills, and none of the more difficult ones, like the resurrection from the dead or the ascension into heaven, which are prophecies in the Old Testament that Jesus does fulfill. And so they went about trying to calculate the probabilities on each of these 8 pre-selected Old Testament prophecies. Once they did that, Dr. Stoner removed the top, the odds on the extreme, the top 10% and bottom 10%, to average out the 80% And then they multiplied the 8 calculations for 600 students and came up with an overall probability. What can you imagine what the odds that someone randomly over the course of history would fulfill those 8 predetermined prophecies contained in the Old Testament? I'll tell you the odds: 1 in 100 quadrillion. 1 in 100 quadrillion. That's 1 with 17 zeros after it.
Isn't it amazing, right?
It's amazing. And that's 8, not 300, over 300.
Do you have one or two specific ones
Well,
on
one
mind?
is of the 8 you're talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
that he would be born in Bethlehem.
Mm.
Another, that a precursor would announce.
Which is really, don't go past that too fast, because they're from Nazareth, and yet he's going to be born in Bethlehem as the prophecy, and
Right.
sure enough, he ends up in
Right.
Bethlehem.
Sure.
It's amazing, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is. It absolutely is. And so,
What
if
was
you
the other
look-
one you were going to say? That you were going to bring another
well,
one
the
up?
other one has to do with the Shroud of Turin and the Sudarium of Oviedo. You familiar with the
No.
Sudarium? Oh,
No.
the Shroud of Turin. Are you familiar with the Shroud
Of
of Turin?
course,
Okay.
yes.
Shroud of Turin.
But for people
is
that
the-
aren't, we have
it's
some
the
new
burial
viewers.
cloth of Jesus. It's the burial cloth of Jesus, the Shroud of Turin. But the Sudarium of Oviedo is the cloth that covered his head while on the cross. In the Jewish faith, was spiritually unclean to look upon a dead person. You would have to go through ceremonial cleansing in the temple in order to. So what happened when Jesus died on the cross? They put a cloth over his head and fastened it to his head. Now, it's referenced.
That was
not by
standard
name.
practice, Deacon.
That was
Deacon Frank,
practice,
yeah.
common practice. That's
Would they
why
have done it to all 3 of the people on the cross?
they
the
would
two-
have. Yes,
two
they
with
would
Jesus?
have.
Okay.
Right. But in John's gospel, it makes reference to these 2 cloths. When Peter and John arrive at the tomb and Peter
That's
goes in
right, yeah.
first, he sees the cloth, and then he makes reference to the burial cloth, not with the cloth, but folded up separate.
Separately, yeah.
Okay. So what would have happened is when Joseph of Arimathea brought Jesus' body to the tomb, they would have taken the sudarium off and separated it, folded it up apart from where Jesus was laid, and the shroud would have covered his body. Now, what's really extraordinary is the bloodstains on the Shroud of Turin and the bloodstains on the sudarium match.
Mm.
And they still exist. These two cloths still exist. One is in Turin, Italy, which is the shroud, and Oviedo is in Spain. And they both exist. What scientists have done is taken the 2 cloths and matched them up and found 20 points of correlation between the 2 cloths.
Unbelievable, huh?
And they said, in any court of law in the world, no more than 10 points of correlation are required to submit for evidence in that court that corroborate the 2 cloths. And this has 20.
Isn't
It
that
not only
wild?
has the same blood, but it has the same. There's 2 types of blood on the shroud and on the sudarium. One is blood, pure blood. Both have AB positive blood type, which is the same as every single Eucharistic miracle has AB positive blood type, and there's over 150 Eucharistic miracles. The second is there's blood and water. And remember, Jesus's heart was pierced with a lance. When they would have taken him down from the cross, one of them would have wrapped his body over their shoulder while the other one was prying the nails out of his hands, right? It would have had to happen, or he would have fallen off the cross. Okay. So what would have happened is, balancing his body on the shoulder, some of that liquid that scientists, doctors talk about, that form around the heart when you go through the type of passion that Jesus went through, and the scourging and the crucifixion, some of that water would have come out his nose and his mouth when his body was wrapped. Much of it came out the side. Some of what was left in the chest cavity would have come out of his nose and mouth. And they're both on both this blood and water is on both the Shroud of Turin and the Sudarium of Oviedo in the same locations. You
Unbelievable,
can't make it
right?
up.
Yeah, no,
That's science.
no,
That's
yeah,
not faith. That's science.
yeah.
When just going back to the first point, which is the 1 in 100 quadrillion, Dr. Peter Stoner said to envision the magnitude of that. He said if you took 100 quadrillion silver dollars and you laid them out in the physical boundaries of Texas, you would fill Texas completely with a stack 2 feet high.
Wow.
He said if you took one of those silver dollars and marked it with an X on it, and then took a man, blindfolded him, put him in the middle of the state, and said, walk for as far as you want in any direction, and you pick one coin, the odds of 1 to 100 quadrillion is that the man picks the one coin marked with the X in the entire state 2 feet deep of
Yeah.
Texas.
When a young guy walks into the story, I think, as he reads scripture, as what we're seeing, not only is the truth coming out, not only is that resonating with his heart, but it's starting to heal their brains. It's amazing, when you're into this toxic culture these young people are living through, Deacon Frank, especially
Yep.
with pornography and those kind of things. Your neural pathways get rewired and it changes
Yep.
your actual, the way you think, and the images you see. When you're reading scripture and you're reading Christ and you're walking into the story, there's a healing process that goes on, and it's so beautiful to see. And not only are you receiving the word, which is true, not only are you getting away from this abusive language that we talked about before. I mean, there's a reason that Jesus is called the Word, huh? Because
Yeah.
he brings the word in and the truth in.
Right.
And let your yes be yes and your no be no. It's such a beautiful thing when we,
Yeah.
we just walk in the truth.
Exactly.
When you push away the lies that we're told, and that's the other thing with these young people. They're told so many lies that they're
Well,
seeking the truth. They
yeah,
want to know the
I
truth.
agree, Jack. And one of the things that people don't, they know there's something not right, but they can't put their finger on it.
Yep.
And I think a
Yes.
lot of it is that the culture has promised them happiness through pleasure, through pleasure. And pleasure is not the same thing as happiness. Happiness is long lasting. When you're happy, and God gives us a heart, and He wants us to be happy. Pleasure is about selfishness and seeking out pornography and whatever other things that might gratify us. But that's selfish. Happiness, on the other hand, comes from being selfless, giving of self. And when you do something for someone else, you feel good. Think of yourself, Jack, and the great work you're doing on this podcast, right? The series, and working with young men trying to find their way to the truth. You have to be drawing a great amount of happiness and joy from that work. It's an effort on your part, okay? But it's truly happy. You experience a happiness and a joy that you've never experienced by seeking out pleasure.
No, and John Paul, he spoke to young people often, as you know, Deacon
Yeah.
Frank. He's the one that started the World Youth Days, etc. And he would
Yeah.
say over and over again, to your point, young people, that your life has meaning to the extent that it's given away as a gift to others. He said, if you want meaning, if you want peace, if you want happiness, give your life away. And and you think about, here's Jesus on the cross, right? This is my body given for you, and he pours himself out. You say, why would someone do that, right? You do it out of love, And it's only until you start to give yourself away that you find find meaning, because this is the actual objective truth of love.
Right.
And here's the last thing I'll just say in this segment and throw it back in your court. Love today, Deacon Frank, has been reduced down to a feeling and then further reduced down to sex. So sex is that pleasure that we're told is going to find happiness. But sexual expression is the two becoming one in true love, and that's where you find real happiness, not in using and abusing. In fact, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is using someone for your own pleasure, and you'll never find what you're looking for there, will
Right.
you?
Absolutely right. You couldn't have said it better, Jack. It's about giving of self, and that's really what marriage is about, right? Giving yourself to your soulmate, your life partner, if you will, and building a life together.
Yeah. Look how many marriages I think, and I look at, we get a lot of emails and a lot of people
Sure.
want to meet because I do a lot of talks on marriages and things.
Right, right.
And marriage is in bad shape right now because
Right.
we forgot what you just said. Both spouses are trying to get, find infinite happiness and out of a finite person. And they're using each other to try to find something that's not really there. It's not brain surgery, is it, Deacon Frank? I got
No,
to be
it's not.
filled with divine life and love from the one hanging on the cross there in the
Right.
Trinity. And then I have to become that person of love. And as I receive, I have something to give away. We're trying to give something to people that we don't have, and then we're trying to grasp something that they don't have. And this is a futile problem.
No,
I mean,
that's it.
how many marriages break up because we don't understand that?
It's over 50% now of Catholic marriages that fail,
Yeah, we're
which
the
is
same as
very unfortunate, very unfortunate. And what we have to do is recognize what marriage is all about. It's about procreation. It's about raising a family. It's about giving of self. The family is the domestic church.
yes, it is.
It's the
Yes, it
domestic
is.
church. And what we have to do is recognize that we have a role to play in God's plan for our salvation. And all of us have been given unique gifts and different opportunities to touch people. And that's the exciting part of it. I can touch many people by being a deacon in a parish and
Yeah, you
writing
can.
articles and meeting a stranger on the street. There's so many different opportunities that present itself. And to
Yeah.
being the best husband and the best father and the best grandfather that I can be.
Yes.
That's really what it's living a life in Christ.
And I'll tell you what, and I'm going to make a little plug here for this Claymore sword behind me. And I'm going to send you, Deacon, if and just to remind people that are new to this show, that Claymore Militus Christi is right on our website. You go to jp2renew.org, jp2renew.org, or go to resources, and you can download the outline of that battle plan. And what it does, Deacon, for the people that we're working with, is it helps you disciple multiple young people, because what happens is, we only have so much bandwidth, so much time. And so if you meet somebody, and I'm speaking to our whole audience here, as you meet somebody, don't let them fall through the cracks, these young people.
Yep.
If
Yep.
you let them fall through the cracks, they'll get excited for a while, and the world will sweep them away. So when you see that, just look at Claymore, download it, and I asked the other person to download it, and the whole outline is there. It's John Paul II's three-part blueprint for taking back the individual human heart, marriage and the family, and then going out into the vineyard and restoring the culture. And it's all there, laid out.
And that's building from inside out, right? You
Yes,
got to
sir.
fix yourself first. You can't do it
100%.
unless you fix yourself. And fixing
Deacon Frank,
yourself is-
say that again. You got to fix who first?
you got to fix yourself.
Yes,
first.
you do.
Yeah.
And that is right on. If you look at Claymore Militus Christi, it starts with the individual human. Solzhenitsyn said that. You remember?
Yep.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn said he's in a gulag. He comes out and he said, I figured out, Marxism is wrong because we forgot about original sin. And it always starts in the individual human heart. That most of the evil, you and I started talking about evil, right, in the beginning of the show. Most of the evil, John Paul would say the same thing, out in the world are men and women cooperating with the evil one. Most of the evil, right? Abortion, again, all those things that we brought up, the trans things, the human sex trafficking, the fentanyl, that's human beings that their hearts have been twisted, right, and distorted.
Absolutely. Now, I know you want to go to my article
I
on
do.
Mary's perpetual virginity, and I know
do. We're going to run out of time, aren't we? So let's do this then. The main point, and I want to make sure we cover that first. The main point is how about these brothers and sisters we hear about, Deacon Frank, in the gospel?
Sure.
That's the main thing.
One of the things we have to recognize is that Mary's perpetual virginity is a dogma of the Catholic faith, which means it's the highest teaching. Okay, and for Catholic in good standing, all dogmas must be believed. So how does this jive with our reading of sacred scripture? Well, all of the New Testament was originally written in Koine Greek. It was the language of Alexander the Great came into existence in much of the Eastern Mediterranean in the 4th century BC and was in existence right up to 600 AD. That was the common language. Many of the figures in the New Testament have two different names, and that's because they have a Greek name and they have a Hebrew name. Mark's name is Greek. His Hebrew name is John. He's John Mark, but we call him Mark. He's the author of the second gospel. And you can look at numerous examples. Matthew and Levi, right? Same person.
Mm-hmm.
Levi is the Hebrew name. Matthew is the Greek name. Okay? So Koine Greek was the common language spoken amongst the Eastern Mediterranean up until 600 AD. Now, this dogma was pronounced at a ecumenical council in 553 at the Second Council of Constantinople. Now, all of the Eastern Catholic bishops that were present would have known Koine Greek. In Koine Greek, the word for brother and sister is adelphoi. And it didn't only mean brother and sister, it meant cousin, it meant sister-in-law, brother-in-law, a whole series of relationships, okay? Good example of this is, and it's right in the Gospels, where Jesus is on the cross. And in John's Gospel, it makes reference to the fact, and below the cross, at the foot of the cross, was his mother, and his mother's sister, Mary of Clopas. Now, taking that, you say, if they're truly sisters, if adelphoi only means sisters, then that means St. Joachim and St. Anne named two of their daughters Mary.
Yes.
What's the logic of that?
Not
right?
going to happen. No.
So it's sister-in-law.
Yeah.
In that case,
Yeah.
right? And the case with the brothers and sisters that are referenced in the Gospels, Mark mentions several of them, right? They are cousins, and they are children of Mary Clopas.
And that's in Scripture too, right, Deacon Frank?
Yes. It makes reference to two of the four that are mentioned as being sons of Mary of Clopas.
Yes.
Okay? So
the other thing is that you mentioned in the article is that Jesus turns to John. He says to John, this is your mother now, right?
Right.
In other words, and here's your son.
Right.
That Jesus wouldn't have done that if he had other actual siblings around, right? So you want to just touch on that real quick, because I thought that was a great point.
Jewish tradition was that it was very tribal, very family oriented, right? And so it would have been a tremendous
dishonor
to his mother and to if he had siblings, his siblings, for doing that.
To give his mother away to somebody that wasn't related.
Correct.
He wouldn't have done that, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So these are great. You made great points in there.
The other one that I think is, I love the Old Testament. I grew up, really liking Matthew's gospel because of all of these prophecies that are included in it. And so I started, as I got older, started to read the Old Testament, and there's a wealth of information there. And one of the things that the Old Testament does is typology. Typology is the study of what the Old Testament prophesizes is fulfilled in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And one of the things is the Ark of the Covenant. And in the Ark of the Covenant, there was the box that God asked, it was the holiest object that there was, kept in the Holy of Holies, and no one could touch it. And, it was just extremely holy. It was the presence of God on earth. And Mary is the new Ark of the Covenant because she carried God himself. And one prefigures what is ultimately fulfilled. And so to think that Mary wouldn't be pure and not have any, the Ark of the Covenant, there's an example where someone actually touches the Ark of the Covenant, drops dead.
It's such a holy image that you just painted that it would almost be, in my mind, right? And as you're in the church long enough, it would almost be like there's no way that Mary didn't stay pure. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Oh,
We
yeah.
would go the
Yeah.
other way,
Yeah.
and you just when I'm speaking to my Protestant friends and evangelical friends, sometimes they have a struggle with this. But I think if they really sat on it, Deacon, like you just brought out with it, looking back at the Old Testament, the New Testament, thinking that this is God Himself takes on a body, and look at the privilege that this woman
Yes.
had. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes I think of our Blessed Mother, and I think, God actually took a human being,
Right.
and now she's the Queen of Heaven. There's no way that she didn't stay pure. There's no
Before
way.
this dogma was pronounced in 553, two of the most famous of the church fathers, those are the earliest men that wrote orthodoxy, and two that are prominent. One is Jerome, who translated the entire Bible, Old and New Testament, into one language, the Latin, which was
Yeah.
called the Latin Vulgate,
Yeah.
as well as St. Athanasius, who in 325
Amazing
was a
guy.
deacon.
Amazing
He
man.
was a deacon at the First Council of Nicaea, where the Nicene Creed, that which we Catholics recite every Sunday, he was the author of much of that document, Athanasius. And both of them, in their writings, write about Mary's perpetual virginity.
Yeah, this was early
You're
on.
talking about two very, yeah, right. One in, the beginning of the fourth century, and the other one at the end of the fourth century. And
Yes.
this dogma came into existence in the 6th century, 553 AD. So I have no doubts Mary's perpetual virginity. In fact, if you really look for answers and search for the truth, you'll find it. And
Yes.
Mary's perpetual virginity is the truth.
Yeah, and you brought it up in your, and I'll make sure I link your art, a number of your articles. I'll link at least a
Yeah,
couple
well,
of these in the show notes so that people have them. The other thing you did is you brought up in the Old Testament there was a precedent for this already,
yeah,
that people would actually, spouses would get married, and
exactly.
yet they took a vow of virginity.
Perpetual virginity. And if
Yeah.
the husband did not, that person, if that woman got married, if the husband did not reject it on the day he was told,
Yeah.
then it stayed in full force and effect. That's
Yeah.
in Numbers chapter 30. One thing I did want to mention, if anyone is interested in reading any of my articles, the link that they can type in is Catholic Exchange Deacon Frank. If you
Okay.
type in Catholic Exchange Deacon Frank, there'll be a link that'll pop up. You can hit that link, and all of my 19 articles will appear.
You're a treasure. Any last parting advice for these young people coming in? I mean, it's exciting to be able to be with them, to walk with them, to talk with them.
But parting word to these young men and women that are searching for the truth, as I said, Jesus is the truth, and he wants us to believe with our whole hearts that he is the one set apart by God to be our redemption, the source of our redemption. And we are called to true discipleship, which means 24/7, being
Yeah.
committed to living a life of true discipleship and making a difference in our lives for the betterment of others. The old Baltimore Catechism, which I grew up and you may have grown up with, it says, why did God create us? That was the very first question. And the answer was to know him, to love him, and to serve him so as to be with him in the next life. Okay? And that order is very important. You must first know him. You can't love him and serve him unless you first know him.
Yeah.
And the best source for knowing him is the scriptures and the church. The
Yeah.
second is to serve, to love. And that love will come through knowledge. And then lastly, when you have knowledge and love, the service becomes very easy. Don't put
Yeah.
that order is very important for anyone listening.
You
It's
can't give what you
knowledge,
don't have.
love, and service. Correct.
Can't give what you don't have. Hey, God bless you, Deacon.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jack.
so much. Thanks for the
Thank you,
time.
Jack.
Thanks for being with us. Thanks,
Sure.
everyone. Talk to you again soon. Bye bye.